Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Fincher.
This is David Fincher broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,243rd day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, temporarily, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. 5 days from today, our new studio will be finished, and you'll be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also, please remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Well, according to the big clock on the truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Day countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide privacy will expire in 131 days, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 2 seconds. Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again. They're going to keep on picking on Todd Akin, and I am going to keep on defending him. You know, I'm so sick of the Republican Party eating their own. Congressman Todd Akin, has been on every newscast, on every network, for some remarks on abortion and rape, which in the real world would be innocuous or at most a question of a medical opinion. But, of course, in today's world of political baloney, in which any dirty trick is used, in which, any slight deviation from political correctness becomes a bigger crime than rape, treason, and anything else put together that you can, Todd Akin has been under attack. He insisted, however, yesterday that he would not leave the Missouri Senate race despite pressure from fellow Republicans and talk of who might replace him on the November 6th ballot. Akin is a staunch, principled opponent of abortion, and he vowed to stay in the race against Democrat Senator Claire McCaskill because he believes he represents a movement that must be heard. Quote, "We're going to continue in the race for the U.S. Senate," he told, he said on the Mike Huckabee radio show, hosted by the former presidential candidate and Arkansas governor. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney, who's spoken out of all sides of his face, however, joined the chorus calling for Todd Akin to pull out of his race after Akin used the phrase legitimate rape in a weekend television interview. But if you look at those of you who are watching the video cast, if you look at the exact quote for when he's what is posted on on your screen right now, you can see he said, "From what I understand from doctors, pregnancy from rape is really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the word in that case means a real or a forcible rape. In other words, really rape, not someone claiming rape afterwards. The female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down." Now, that has been confirmed to me over the years by doctors that I've known and who have been involved, of course, in the pro-life movement. He went on to say, today his fellow Missourians urged him to step aside. This is Romney speaking again. And I think he should accept their counsel and exit the Senate race, who had previously, Romney, of course, who previously condemned Akin's comments. Now, Romney, when he was governor of Massachusetts was pro-abortion. Now, because he's running for the Republican, he's the de facto nominee, he's returned to his religious roots, and he is pro-life. But I don't believe him. So he can't really stand someone who's going to get out there and say what he thinks and stand by it. Tim Wildman, president of the influential American Family Association, was one of several social conservatives who've come to Aiken's defense. He said, "This is a decent and honorable man who's been pro-life. He's apologized for his choice of words, and that should be the end of it." Conservative Representative Steve King of Iowa posted a tweet on his congressional website Tuesday saying the left media paid in cash by George Soros is dictating the response of leading Republicans. How can the American dream survive? He said that Aiken's a strong Christian man with a wonderful family, and the election should be about Aiken's record. Now, I'm tongue-tied today. Aiken had until 5 p.m. yesterday to get his name off the ballot for the November 6th election. That's passed. Now they have until September 25th, which is the last day his name can be removed by a court order, but I don't think it happens. The Republicans are trying to force him to happen, then they want to run a woman who's probably pro-abortion in his place. In another sign that he's not leaving, Aiken has spent $150,000 on Tuesday for television ads in 7 media markets, and I applaud him. When we come back, we'll talk about Obama scheming with the union goons. Well, we're back, and any thinking American, probably anybody who listens to my show, knows that Obamacare, to start with, is god-awful, but worse than that, it may well be something far more nefarious. Obamacare is a big scheme by unions to gain millions of new members and fill their coffers with $1 billion in new dues, unquote, according to a new book by Mallory Factor, a Forbes columnist and senior editor of Money and Politics for TheStreet.com. The book, which is entitled Shadow Bosses, Government Unions Control America and Rob Taxpayers Blind, says Mr. Obama's health care plan was a ploy by unions to organize millions of health care workers. In the book, the author cites a 2008 memo from Dennis Rivera of the Service Employees International Union to the Obama transition team, pledging the union's support for passing health care legislation. Subsequent coordination between the SEIU and the Federation of Local Employees shows hundreds of millions of dollars were spent promoting Obamacare, and a booklet published by SEIU supported the Obamacare legislation. The author, Mallory Factor, also cites emails from former federal labor staffer Don Lewis. Quote, "It's clear that big labor is banking on the probability that all health care workers eventually become federal, state, and municipal health care employees." That's right, that everybody in the health care industry would become a government employee. Lewis told Factor, according to the Daily Caller, who reported it, meaning it would make them eligible for involuntary unionization through public sector unions, because in many states you have closed shops where you have to belong to the union to have a job. So this is one way to build up a segment of the American economic makeup that has been on the decline for many, many years, which are labor unions. They've been failing because there have not been a need for them because of competition, because someone with real talent, and he'll get off their butt and do something, can go out and always get a better job in a decent growing market economy, but they want to level the playing field, which always means make it worse for those who are talented and punish success. Now, Factor has also chaired the Economic Roundtable for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He led a 2009 economic summit for the U.S. House Republican Conference and Policy Committee, served on the Council of Foreign Relations, and co-founded the Monday Meeting, a meeting of elected officials, journalists, business leaders, and authors. This is not some schmuck of whom no one has ever heard before. Quote, the government employee unions can then enlist pro-union state governments to treat these healthcare workers as government employees, Factor told the Daily Caller, and, quote, unionize them just like they unionize the care providers, unquote, themselves. For every million additional healthcare workers unionized in the 27 non-right-to-work states, the unions stand to earn $1 billion in dues. Now think about that. In the non-right-to-work states, many of them are big states. Florida, for example, my home state, is a right-to-work state. You cannot be forced to belong to a union. But in those 27 that aren't, a majority of the states in the country, people will be forced, if they want to continue to be doctors and nurses and medical techs under Obamacare, to join a union. Now, the most déclassé vice president in modern history. I mean, this guy is so funny. They have crucified Todd Akin for saying one word that he could have chosen better, and yet Joe Biden, the stupidest vice president in American history, gets away with constantly saying whatever he wants, and now he's gone over yet another unspoken line in the polarization of the American political system, in the destruction of time-honored traditions of political decency. He's going to hold a rally with his supporters next Monday in Tampa, Florida, on what will be the first day of the Republican convention. The Obama campaign announced this past Monday that Biden would travel on August 27 and 28 to the host city of the GOP convention for a number of events. This is an absolutely unprecedented move for a presidential or vice presidential candidate to crash a rival convention. The parties have traditionally allowed each other to take center stage during their convention week and use the time to raise funds and to rest. Well, of course, the great thing is if this really gets coverage, Biden's going to say something stupid, so it could blow up in their face. But it is still just one more example of this thuggish approach of the entire Obama administration. Of course, since he doesn't respect his oath of office, since he doesn't respect the Constitution, why would I, fool that I am, expect that his vice president might be decent and let the Republicans have their convention in peace? Now, remember, I'm not a Republican. I don't like Romney Ryan. I don't like Obama Biden. So I am not picking sides here, except the fact that this guy has no class. It's just a low blow and ought to be noted as such. If the Republicans did at the Democrat convention, you could be assured that the mainstream media would be out screaming, because there is clearly a bias on a whole bunch of fronts that the mainstream media has. Black over white, Democrat over Republican, left over right. I can go on, the list can go on, and there's two sets of rules, one for the Democrats and their allies, and another for the Republicans, one for the left and their allies, another for the right and its allies, and it shows. It's going to be very interesting to see how the mainstream media really reports this. Now, the Wisconsin Attorney General has asked the state Supreme Court to reinstate a voter identification law before the November 6th elections. The law would require otherwise eligible voters to present a government-issued photo ID before being allowed to cast ballots. It was declared unconstitutional on March 12th by a circuit judge, and a second judge in a non-jury trial ruled the law invalid on July 17th. The Attorney General appealed both rulings on the state's behalf. What is wrong with having people have voter IDs. They are easy to get. To say it's racist is ludicrous. What it does is it prevents vote fraud. So people who oppose voter ID laws are, in fact, by saying, they're not saying it out loud, but they're saying it by their actions, they are in favor of voting fraud. They have filed papers, the states filed papers to bypass the state's intermediate appellate court and take it to the Supreme Court in Madison, Wisconsin. Now, this is something that first-term Governor Scott Walker, a Republican, signed into law last year, and they tried to throw him out of office. It didn't work. Let me tell you how tough it is to get an ID acceptable to vote in the state of Wisconsin. First of all, there are 9, count them, 9 forms of acceptable ID. They include a driver's license or Department of Transportation issued state identification card. Further, the agency is required by law to issue an ID free to anyone who doesn't have a photo identification and can prove their citizenship and that they'll be at least 18 years old on election day and is otherwise eligible to vote. Now that to me does not seem like an insurmountable hurdle. This is not a poll tax that picks on poor people. It's a free ID. It doesn't cost them a cent. One of the two most important things a citizen does is vote and serve on a jury. Since you have to have an ID to go on an airplane, you have to have an ID to open a bank account, you have to have an ID to do damn near everything, you ought to have an ID to exercise your highest rights as a citizen, which is to vote. I think it's entirely reasonable. Of course, the cases were brought to oppose this law by the usual subjects, the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, and the Milwaukee branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Certain People. This is a bad judicial ruling. It's just flat out judicial encouragement of voting fraud, and the judges who did it ought to be ashamed of themselves, and I'm proud that the state is pursuing this. Stay tuned. When we come back, we'll talk about maybe World War III. This is David Finzer with Truth and Lies Radio. I remember back in high school there was a poem that we had to read. It wasn't very great, but it went like something like this. This is the way the world will end, the world will end, the world will end. This is the way the world will end, not with a bang, but a whimper. Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I guess, is a little bit like me, and his world is not going to end. If it is going to end with a whimper, it might end with a bang. According to reports, he's determined to launch an attack to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, and he wants to do so before the presidential election in November. Now, that's pretty smart, actually, because he knows Barack Obama is a Muslim. He knows that after Obama is past the elections, Obama will have no reason to support Israel. He's undercut Israel every chance he's gotten. So he believes, Benjamin Netanyahu believes, that Obama would have no choice but to back the Israeli decision in the weeks before he has to face the nation at the polls, at least according to a report in the Times of Israel. And if you recall, it was, 20 years ago? Maybe less than that, but quite some time ago, where the Israelis took out, I think it was an Iraqi nuclear facility. And that was very important. Can you imagine Saddam Hussein with nuclear weapons? We have a regime in Iran, which I know my Thursday night colleague may disagree with me. We have a regime in Iran that is as nearly completely evil as any regime on earth. It ranks right up there, as far as I'm concerned, with Castro's Cuba and with Kim, whichever the hell Kim it is now, in North Korea. This, in fact, the president, if you want to use that title to dignify him, of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has actually declared war on Israel. He has said that they will use their nuclear weapons to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. Now, you can't get much more clear than that. Apparently, they don't have political correctness in Iran, or that's Iranian political correctness. So you have a situation where the man who's been elected by this, democratically elected by the citizens of the state of Israel, the only democratic state in the Middle East, who has had war declared, nuclear war declared, on his nation, and he has to decide how to prevent that from happening. And the only way, since sanctions have failed and people say, oh, they've just made the Iranians more radical, how the hell more radical can the Iranians have gotten? Have you all forgotten, has everyone forgotten when Jimmy Carter was president and they invaded the U.S. Embassy, and for 444 days, America went through the agony of having its diplomatic personnel, in violation of the Geneva Convention, held as hostages in Iran? Do you remember Jimmy Carter's half-assed, failed attempt to recover them, and the helicopters weren't properly fitted for deserts, and because of the sandstorms, they went down in the desert, and we made fools of ourselves? And do you remember what got them out? I remember very clearly. I can still see it in my mind's eye. As Ronald Wilson Reagan was taking the oath of office to be elected, to become the President of the United States, there was a split screen. And on the left side of the screen was an airliner. And on the right side was Ronald Reagan. And as he finished that oath of office and lifted his hand from off of the Bible, it was announced that the airliner had left Iranian airspace, because those people in Iran, those crazy mullahs, who are perfectly willing to send millions of their people out to die, didn't want to die themselves, and they were afraid that Ronald Reagan would turn around and, before he gave his inauguration speech, turn to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and say, nuke them. They only understand force. And they, as typical, most dictators are cowards. And, you know, they're perfectly willing to send everyone else to their death in jihad so they can have their 72 virgins. But the leadership doesn't want that to happen. And they are using the massive financial capacity of the Islamist world to buy legitimacy for themselves. The Europeans have been sucking up to Iran for years. That's because, of course, Europe has no oil of its own, whereas the United States does and North America does. And in reality, the United States would not have to be dependent upon Middle Eastern oil if we uncapped our oil, used the Keystone Pipeline, drilled offshore, etc. We could make it so that they had to go back to cooking their dinner over burning camel turds, which would be just fine with me. And Netanyahu understands American politics. He lived in the United States for 6 years. He was active in his U.S. high school's debate club, and hence he speaks nearly perfect English, albeit with a Philadelphia accent, which I suppose is a little bit to be regretted. From the Prime Minister's point of view, the time for action is getting closer, according to a report filed by Elon Ben David, who is a very influential Israeli reporter. Ben David said Netanyahu would not wait for a meeting with Obama at the next month's meeting of the entirely useless United States General Assembly in New York to decide on a strike on Iran. In any case, I doubt if Obama could say anything that could convince Netanyahu to delay a possible attack, he said. Ben David is a military reporter for Israel's Channel 10 News and has been given extensive access to the country's Air Force and its preparation for a potential attack on Tehran. Now, think about this. Neither Romney is more pro-Israel than Obama, but Romney's not doing that well in the polls. And with all the things going on, the race is certainly a toss-up. So now is the time for Netanyahu to bite the bullet, as it were, and to take out that nuclear facility, which will save lives. Now, when we come back, I'm going to talk about just how much Obama and Romney are alike. It's going to be a little bit of a reprise of yesterday, but it needs to be heard. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio. I've been taking a lot of flack on my Facebook page because I will not support Mitt Romney. And I've been accused of being a secret liberal, despite the fact that I walked a precinct for Barry Goldwater when I was 11 years old, that I was Florida State Chairman of Young Americans for Freedom, that I ran for 8 years in Washington the Conservative Action Foundation, that I was on the executive of the World Anti-Communist League, the Secretary General of the World Youth Freedom League, have spent most of my life fighting for free men, free minds, and free markets. But I oppose these two candidates because, as I pointed out yesterday in great detail, but perhaps too quickly, they really are essentially the same candidate. They stand for the same thing. So, because there is no real difference, which I'm going to give you a bunch of the indicators, the most important ones, then we have to look at we have to go beyond mere politics ourselves to statesmanship as electors and say, what's the best for the country? Well, the best thing for the country is to elect good members of Congress whom, as I've said, can defund bad government programs, can refuse to appoint or can refuse to advise and consent to the appointment of judges that are left-wing and that do not support the Constitution, and not worry about this fake difference between Obama and Romney, both of whom belong to the same club, both of whom are backed by the same Wall Street welfare giants, the banksters, the multinational organizations, etc. Obama is slightly to the left of Romney, but it's so slight that you couldn't put your hand between the two. Now, for example, both supported TARP, the bailout of the big banks. Okay? Romney says that Obama's bailout of the auto industry was actually his idea. They both have a track record of big spenders and believing in big government while they're in office. They both support the Federal Reserve System. They believe in the independence of the Federal Reserve System. They say that Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke did a good job during the last financial crisis. That both felt he should be renominated to a second term. Both oppose a full audit of the Federal Reserve. Now let's just stop there for a minute. The Federal Reserve is privately owned. How can anyone who supported Ron Paul possibly vote for either of these candidates when they agree on all of those things? They are in favor of business as usual, which will cause the further destruction of the American economy. As I have pointed out on Money Monday a couple of times, they don't even have to print money anymore. All the Federal Reserve does now is go on the computer and make electronic money, which they transfer to banks. That's easy. It saves the cost of printing. You know, the Federal Reserve is totally unconstitutional. It is the engine of the destruction of American independence, of American freedom. It works in concert with the big banks, especially just the special banks that have direct access to it, who can borrow unlimited amounts of money at 0% interest, then turn around and buy U.S. Treasury bills at 2%, and they have no risk. What a great deal. And Obama and Romney are in favor of this. They are the same candidate. They're two sides of the same counterfeit coin. Now, they're also both on record as saying that Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner's done a good job. Well, I suppose from Adolf Hitler's standpoint, Adolf Eichmann, who ran Auschwitz, did a good job too. That doesn't mean he was a good man or that the job that was done was good. It was meant by their relativistic morals that it was good. These guys have no morals. They are playing on the same team. This is really not a contest between two competing football teams. This is a contest between two squads in the same team preparing for the final big football game. Romney was the one who developed the very Obamacare plan that became law and yet has since been attacked. Wall Street has spent hundreds of millions of dollars supporting both of these candidates. Now, on a more personal level, they both believe the TSA is doing a great job. Have you been through an airport lately in the United States? If you have, do you think the TSA has done a great job? Do you think the invasion of your privacy is something that the President of the United States should support? Do you think that men digging around in 85-year-old grandmother's adult diapers is a good thing? Do you think machines that send deadly X-rays in amounts that at levels that doctors aren't allowed to use are a good thing? Yet they both supported it. They both supported the NDAA and the renewal of the Patriot Act, which means that they both believe that the federal government is entitled to indefinitely detain American citizens that they consider to be terrorists or associated persons, and yet they refuse to define what that means. They both believe that they can write what they used to call a lettre de cachet and simply by presidential fiat put someone in jail without right of a counsel, without the right to go before a judge and be charged with a crime, without writ of habeas corpus, without a trial by a jury of your peers in the state and district where the crime is allegedly committed, all those nasty, inconvenient things that the Bill of Rights guarantees to every American citizen, whether native, natural-born, or naturalized, and in fact guarantees to virtually anyone who is under the authority of where the American flag flies. Worse than that, both of these men believe that American citizens, or anybody for that matter, who are simply suspected, not proved, not even beyond with a preponderance of evidence, certainly not beyond a reasonable doubt, merely suspected of being terrorists, can be killed by order of the president without a trial. Remember we talked about on every Tuesday the president gets the list of the hits for the week and he gets to pick out who is going to be knocked off. This is much more like being the capo di tutti capi, the boss of all the bosses of the mafia, than it is being the chief executive of a free republic. Further, both candidates support absolute legal lawlessness in something called extraordinary rendition, which is where if you can't extradite someone from a country, you kidnap them. Governments engaging in violation of the law destroys respect for the law and destroys the very foundations of the law. The police can lie. The Attorney General can break the law. The Attorney General can ignore the very Congressional Oversight Committee that is in charge of looking at what he is supposed to be doing. These candidates are the same. They also want to take away our guns. They want strict gun control measures. Why? Because they only want the government to have guns. You know, there used to be a bumper strip that said when guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Well, that's not true. That bumper strip is false. When guns are outlawed, only outlaws and the government will have guns. And I guarantee you, you're in a hell of a lot more danger from the government than you are from the outlaws. Both candidates have been pro-abortion most of their career. Romney is the worst on this. I mean, at least Obama is an honest-to-goodness, flat-out baby killer. That's fine. But Romney, went to get elected governor in Massachusetts, was pro-abortion. Try to get elected president of the United States, all of a sudden, he's pro-life. Both candidates have a history of nominating extremely liberal judges. So why are we saying we've got to elect Romney because he's going to appoint better judges? Well, his history doesn't show that. They both have a horrible record when it comes to job creation, etc. Both candidates believe that the president has the power to take the country to war without getting approval of the U.S. Congress. I tell you that Obama and Romney are the same candidate, and if you want a choice and not an echo, vote for one of the third-party candidates. That is what I really believe should be done. Well, now we've reached the top of the hour, so I will be gone for a bit. When I come back, we'll be talking about the U.S. injustice system. This is David Fincher broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,243rd day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. 5 days from today, our new studio will be finished, and you'll be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world, and join the conversation. Also, don't forget to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $981,279,000,000 and counting. A debt per citizen of almost $51,000 and per taxpayer of almost $140,000, which once again indicates how many people don't pay taxes. 49.5% of the people in America don't pay taxes. The total national debt, when you add everything together, and I just can never think of words to express the magnitude of this, is almost $57 trillion, or a total debt of $684,000 per family. Well, today is Wanton Wednesday, which means I'm joined by my U.S. Injustice co-host, Florida defense attorney Juan Torres. Hello, Juan.
Hi, David. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you very much. It's hotter than the Hobbs here in Serbia. We've got, it's been in the 90s today and this week, and I guess we've got a little bit more until September finally comes around. But at least the humidity's only been like 30%, so that's not too bad.
It's 100 degrees there.
Well, 96, yep. Anyway, let's talk about racial preferences. Now, you're, I guess, technically part of a minority group, right?
I am part of a minority group.
And, well, you know, see, I'm lucky, too. I'm a twofer, because now I'm old and I'm crippled. So I'm a twofer. But anyway, the Obama administration, and this is a story I talked about yesterday, so if my listeners think that it's deja vu all over again, it is, but that's because I wanted to talk about it today with my legal expert. Yesterday I was just talking about it based on my opinion. The Obama administration filed a brief this week urging the Supreme Court to uphold controversial racial preferences and affirmative action in public, federally subsidized university admissions, claiming that the government has a, quote, vital, unquote, interest in perpetuating the use of race-based quotas and that the practice does not violate the U.S. Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. A plaintiff, Abigail Fisher, claims that in 2008 she suffered from illegal discrimination when the University of Texas at Austin rejected her application in favor of less qualified applicants who happened to be of a minority race. Well, Juan, what do you think about it? How do you think this fits with the law? Do you think this is equal protection?
David, this is great for me because I am Hispanic, half Jewish, old, and short.
You're a fourfer.
I'm a fourfer. I'm in it. I love this. This is really equal protection of the law.
If you have a sex change operation, then you're really covered.
Yeah, I got the whole spectrum.
Right.
But this is really crazy because it's basically reverse discrimination. You're saying, hey, we want well-rounded individuals that are the best, but we also have to consider minorities, but we'll take the minorities over the more qualified applicants. Does that make any sense?
Well, it's
just a political thing during elections. That's all it is.
Well, see, I don't even call it. It's really not reverse discrimination. It's just discrimination. It's not reverse racism. It's just racism. It's special privileges for special people.
It's built for the whites against Hispanics, against blacks, against Jews, against whatever, Arabs, whatever it is. That's what it's all about.
Well, you remember, Juan, Florida A&M University was originally Florida's black university in the days of segregation, right?
Yes, it was.
And then after segregation, they started admitting white students, but there came a time when FAMU said, we don't want to let any more white people in because we don't want to change the traditional black culture of our university. Now, if FSU across the street had said, we don't want to let any more black people in because it would change the traditional white culture of our university, what would have happened?
Oh, my God. Those guys would have been jailed.
Right. So it really is special rights for special people, which we can keep talking about when we come back, but now we have to break for commercial. This first segment always is so short. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio with Juan Torres on Wanton Wednesday talking about the U.S. injustice system. Let's talk about some more racism when we come back. Well, we're back on Wanton Wednesday with our U.S. injustice expert, defense attorney Juan Torres in Fort Pierce, Florida, connected to us over the internet, and we were talking about government-sponsored racism that is just a mirror of the racism that existed before the Civil Rights Act.
It's a legal point here, David, in the government's brief where they state that they want people that eventually become civilian and military leaders from a well-qualified and diverse pool of university and service academy graduates of all backgrounds who possess the understanding of diversity that is necessary to govern and defend the United States. Well, you're implying that those that are more qualified than the alleged minority person have no idea what diversity is about. You're implying many other things that are totally out of context, and you can't prove.
Well, I also, Juan, don't remember any place in the Constitution where the word diversity appears.
No.
There is no Constitution.
It's equal protection of the law.
Right. And as I recall, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were all written by white men. So there was no diversity there either.
There was no diversity there.
I mean, the biggest diversity was between Catholics and Protestants.
What they meant is equal protection for everyone.
Right. The law should be colorblind.
Colorblind, exactly. There shouldn't be well, let me give him another 50 points because he's black, or let me give him 75 points because he's Hispanic or Indian. Let me give him 150 points for that.
Well, remember
what's happening.
Remember what Martin Luther King said when he dreamed of a day when people would be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin?
And that was his main goal.
Right.
It's contrary to what they're arguing.
Oh, yeah.
He's arguing the same thing the Constitution is saying. Equal protection for everyone.
Right.
They're taking it a step further.
All right. Now, the high court's agreed to hear the case in February. Are you taking any bets?
I will take a bet that with this court, they will overrule it.
Oh, so they'll strike.
They'll go for the plaintiff there.
Okay. Well, that would be a good thing because
this court is a lot more conservative, and I think very intellectual. And this demands not only a conservative view, it really demands an intellectual view of how they're positioning themselves, the government in their briefs. It just doesn't make any sense, David. Everyone should be treated equally.
Well, speaking of equality, I think we should move on to our next subject because it appears that the state of Washington doesn't quite believe in equality when it comes to certain parties. The Washington State Republican Party failed to nominate a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2010, and under the letter of the law, that failure should mean that Mitt Romney has to qualify to be in Washington State's presidential ballot because he's now a minor party and the deadline's already passed. And the Libertarian Party of Washington State has filed a suit to have his name removed from the November ballot. The Secretary of State's office, of course, has come out with some gobbledygook, but I read the law over and over. WAC 434-208-130. They have an interesting way of numbering things, and it seems to me the Republicans screwed up.
Well, this is gobbledygook. This person, the Secretary of State, if he is the attorney and he is arguing this, and he wrote this, he should receive a bar complaint by not actually stating the true content of the law. Let me tell you, in the state of Florida right now, within the last 4 or 5 years, if you make a comment during a closing argument in a case where you do not state the words, I believe the evidence showed, you just said, hey, this is what it is, and you are absolutely wrong, you can get a bar complaint automatically by the court system, by the judges. When the case is appealed, if you lose the case and it's appealed, the Court of Appeal judges can file bar complaints against you. Well, this is what should be done against this guy, because he completely obliterated the law by not stating the whole piece of the law, the entire law. More
importantly, it seems that since the only applicable race in 2010 was for the Senate and the Republicans didn't run anybody, they lost their major party status under Washington's law.
That's clear. That's really clear. When I'm taking it a step further, I am saying, look, these government officials are out of control. He should be reprimanded. This is disingenuous. This is unprofessional and unethical. Period.
What do you think the chances are of the suit succeeding?
Not at all. There's no way.
Even though the law...
It didn't comply with the law in 2000, or they didn't have anybody in 2010. That's all. The factual aspect of clear data.
Okay, so you think then the court will strike...
Just an interpretation of the statute.
So do you think
the court's not going to strike the statute?
No, but will they strike Romney from the ballot?
They have to.
Okay. If they follow the law.
Have to. Well, judges do whatever they want, as you know.
Right, you've told me that about 7 million times in the years I've known you.
Yes, exactly. But I believe that there's no way. There's no way he will not. He cannot be on that ballot. Legally, he cannot be on that ballot.
So that
I mean, this is even clear to non-lawyers.
So that would be a challenge then. So if he was on the ballot, that would be a challenge to the whole election.
It could be, but does it affect the whole election?
Well, I mean, within Washington State. I mean, suppose it comes down, Juan, to Washington State's got the deciding number of electoral votes.
Then now you have a real issue here.
I mean, this is going to make hanging chads look like nothing.
It could what?
This is going to make hanging chads look like nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, if they allow him to be on the ballot, and it could affect the elections, like you indicated, then the other challenges have an issue here.
Well,
now, if it really doesn't affect David, it's really a moot point because, it doesn't do anything. However, legally, from a legal standpoint, you took an oath as a judge, as a justice, or whatever you are within the legal system, to adhere to the law and to follow the law.
Sure, but
just like this lawyer who wrote this took an oath not to lie to the court, not to mislead the court.
Well, one of the other things I'm thinking of, though, I mean, most of the states have these laws to keep minor parties off the ballot. But think about this. If Romney is not on the ballot, the Libertarians will get more than 5%.
Yeah.
Which means
because what we need.
Which would be great because then they have major party status in the next round. The Republicans will by, I suspect they'll have nominated somebody will be running for something. Maybe they'll get major party status again. But the thing is, even if they leave Romney on, the Libertarians have huge damages if they're not granted major party status.
Damages. We're talking about possibly shooting down the election.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, I don't know.
Man, that's a big time. That's my concern about the courts following the law and acting through their duty that they have.
Well, this is one more case of the executive just ignoring the law.
Yeah, well, that's what they do. The executive branch do whatever they want.
So you think then, based on the facts at least presented here, the Libertarian Party's case is well founded and they should prevail?
Oh yeah, I think they should prevail. There's no question.
They
would not have filed it if they didn't think they would have prevailed. I think that's such a big issue here.
Yeah, I would love.
Can't get around. The government can't get around it.
I
don't see any way to get around it. They're iron-tight.
Yeah, and I would love to see Romney thrown off the ticket, thrown off the ballot. That's just, the Republicans deserve it. They have been so sleazy after all the things they did to Ron Paul during the nomination process.
Yeah.
This would be payback big time, and it would be legal, and it's going to determine whether or not Washington State is governed by law or by the parties.
And they're on the up and up. They're the white knights. There's nothing illegal or disingenuous about their laws.
Right. Well, when we come back, we'll be talking about the state of Florida and some changes and a federal court decision having to do with its voting law. So stay tuned. We'll be right back in a few minutes. Don't go away. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio, and I'm back with my Wanton Wednesday U.S. Injustice co-host, Juan Torres, defense attorney and general troublemaker from Fort Pierce, Florida. Juan, it seems like the Yankee federal courts have gotten involved in dealing with Florida's election laws. There was a statute that pushed by Governor Rick Scott, which empowered counties to reduce in-person early voting from 8 days before the election to 4, and to bar early voting on the Sunday before the election day. But federal judges have ruled that it violates the 47-year-old Voting Right Act because it discriminates against African Americans. My favorite part was where the court talked about, let me see if I find the many African American churches organize souls to the polls drives to transport their congregants to early voting sites on Sunday. Can you imagine what would happen if after Catholic Mass on Sunday, the priests would do the same thing? The Catholic Church would be attacked for getting involved in religion. Aren't we dealing with special rights for special people again? Special rules?
There's no difference. This is the same difference. This is exactly what's happening. The same difference. And where do they get these statistics from? Where do they get these facts from? This doesn't even make sense.
Well, it doesn't make sense to me. What's interesting, of course, is it only applies to 5 Florida counties.
Now you have 2 different sets of voting regulations.
Sure, because, well, of course, that's because the Civil Rights Act originally applied to all of Florida and all of a whole bunch of other named southern states, all of them southern states, because there's never been any racism in the North, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. It's only ever been in the South where there's racism.
Northerners never owned slaves. Neither did Lincoln.
No, well, Lincoln didn't, but Ulysses S. Grant was actually the last general from the war between the states to own slaves. He didn't free them until the 13th Amendment freed them. But we've come a long way from there, and I wonder, as a Floridian, when the hell are they going to stop reconstructing us?
They're not.
They're not.
They're not. They're not. This is going to go on forever. This will never stop. It's another political drama. Another special interest group, and dividing a state over what? 5 counties? How is that going to make a difference in anything?
Well, Hillsborough is pretty big. I don't know whether it will make a difference or not, but it certainly seems.
We Cubans want the same thing in Dade County.
Sure. Then I guess. The
gays want their own.
Well, let's have the yeah, but the point is the special reference to the court, the federal courts, which seem to always hate religion anyway. I mean, the Catholic Church is regularly attacked for its stand against abortion, and yet Democratic candidates openly campaign in black churches from black pulpits. Here they're talking about busing their congregants to vote. And they're specifically saying African-American voters in their ruling. You know, more than half, 54%, they say, of African-American voters in Florida cast ballots using early in-person voting.
Yeah.
Well, one cannot help but wonder if they're still using the old Democratic motto of vote early and often.
Yes. That's what got me, the flag went up, the lights went up. These people all early vote? Nah, I don't buy that. I just can't buy that. I just can't buy it.
Well, no.
You can't sell it to me that this is... They may do it, but there's a purpose for doing it. Somebody's taking them there.
Sure.
It's too high a percentage.
Well, I mean, I love the part where it says this would be analogous to closing polling places in African-American precincts. No one's proposing that. No. And it talks about it would impose a sufficiently material burden. What's the material burden of not having to have polling places open on Sunday, which costs the voters money?
Yeah.
And, because some group wants to do it, does that mean we have to do something special on Friday for Muslim voters?
For every
it's
racism. Listen, if we don't do it for every group you can think of, then it's not equal protection under the law, and it's racism.
Well, so obviously then the polls should be open on Slava days for Serbian Orthodox.
Yeah.
And name days for Greek Orthodox, and the Catholic Church should start busing its people right after a rousing sermon to vote against anybody who supports abortion. They should start busing them, and the courts would jump all over them.
Well, they have no choice, especially if they win here.
I mean,
okay, because this is probably going to be appealed.
sure.
Definitely
Well, it'll be appealed, but I don't know. It's going to be in time before the election. Who knows?
Oh no! Well, it may be because of the time of the essence. Maybe, possibly. We'll see.
Well, but this again is a complete violation to me as a layman of equal protection of the law.
Protection. You're absolutely right.
And it also violates the states' rights. I mean, for example, that would be like mandating that when the state's polls, what hours the state's polls must be open. They vary from state to state.
Where did they take this, David? They took it to federal court.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
They didn't take it to state court because they knew the state people wouldn't do it. They took it into federal court.
Right.
And this is, again, abrogating states' rights.
And as I recall, under 1965 Civil Rights Act, it's not even the federal court in Florida, it's the federal court in the District of Columbia that has jurisdiction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not even our own Yankee federal court, carpetbagger federal court.
No.
It's the federal court in the District of Columbia, which is not a state, telling the sovereign state of Florida when it has to have voting hours. Isn't that essentially it?
That's exactly what they're doing.
So
they're
you're
controlling everything. And again, this is an unequal protection under the law.
So it's we're dealing again with racism, political advantage, and just an abuse of law by the government. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about another
manipulation of votes.
Right. When we come back, we'll talk about another different kind of abuse of the law that's a little more graphic. Stay tuned. This is David Fincher. Well, we're back, and of course, the government abuses us at all levels, but in this case, the government has abused someone up close and personal. A veteran cop was fired and incredibly charged with criminal battery after officers reviewed a video of him slamming a woman into her car in Pensacola, Florida. Dash cam footage from August 2nd shows Officer Christopher Gerasi telling Abby Bonds to get back in her car before he grabs her left arm and swings her body into the side of the car, causing her to fall to her knees and bang her chin against the vehicle. "I'm not fighting you," Bonds is heard saying as he cuffs her. "Why are you hitting me?" Well, Juan, this is right up your alley. I'm sure you have a thing or two to say about this and some stories to tell.
Well, this was the right thing to do, but they didn't have any choice. If this cam wouldn't have been on, then this guy wouldn't have had to file this
The charges.
But what is it called when that there was some sort of report of violence.
Right.
Okay. So something, number one, something triggered him to file a report. I want to know what that was.
Right.
Whether he maybe saw the video afterwards or someone else saw it and they said, you better go file a report. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they did the right thing, but like I said, they had no choice. They had to arrest him and fire him. This is clearly a battery. This happens many, many times, specifically with young people. What's happened here, the unarticulate assumption of the facts from experience is that he didn't believe her story. He maybe smelled alcohol. She's drunk. She was the one that stole the car. But the woman seems to be telling the truth. When I was on the phone outside the car calling somebody, my car had been stolen. So she was standing outside the car. In the state of Florida, if you are sufficiently close, they can try to connect you to the car. But if you're not, if there's other people around, it's going to be very hard to connect her to the vehicle unless it was an eyewitness. Okay?
Okay.
This is not before this is before the stop, actually.
Right.
Somebody's got to show that she was driving.
Okay. Which nothing in this report indicates that happened, and there's nothing that indicates she was arrested.
Well, I'm sure the report has a lot more.
Right.
And perhaps there's even a supplemental report by this point. You know?
Now, one of the things I found interesting, Juan, was after being slammed around, they said he submitted to field sobriety tests and performed poorly. Well, if you were beaten up, I think you'd perform poorly too.
Yeah.
I couldn't pass a field sobriety test because of my brain surgery. I have no balance.
Well, how many people do you see walking down the street and walking the line?
Yeah.
How many people do you see doing the balance test and practicing? You know, when you first started riding a bicycle, David, did your dad buy the bicycle when you got on it and rode off, or did you have training wheels and you took one off, then you took the second one off, and your dad still held your bike behind you?
No, my dad actually took the training wheels off and pushed me down a hill, but that's beside the point. Remember, I grew up in a German family.
Yeah. But the whole point of the matter is that I'm surprised they couldn't cover this up because of the video.
So in this case, video is a good thing, and so it's interesting.
I love videos. I love videos because videos tell the story. When a cop stops you for DUI, it's all a subjective evaluation. Okay?
Right.
There's nothing objective about anything they ask you to do.
They don't do field breathalyzer tests?
Well, the field sobriety test is his observation.
Okay.
So he can write number one, he or she can write whatever they want. But I got to tell you that I've seen thousands of videos, and probably 85% of those videos do not correspond with the personal observations of a trained law enforcement officer.
Okay.
Like voices weren't slurring, like they weren't swaying. Like if there was a little sway, he was swaying, or just as bad or worse than they were. If he's dumb enough to be on the video.
So this is not
how they tell you, they demonstrate it to you. You point your finger to nose test. You point your finger forward, bring it to the side, and then bring it in. Well, then they go, okay, you ready? Bring it around, right? They say bring it around. So what does your mind do? Brings it around. Totally different than what they just demonstrated to you.
Right.
I've been through all this thousands of times.
So what you're saying is this is not an uncommon occurrence.
Not uncommon, but it is common in the sense that there's too many of them.
Well, one is too many.
Understand if there's one, there's too many. And there's a lot more than one.
You know, I used to be, when I was much more conservative than I am and less libertarian, I used to be opposed to civilian review boards, but I'm certainly in favor of them now.
I've always been in favor of them. And that's because before I went to law school, growing up in Dade County, I was a court observer. And we actually wrote notes on the behavior of judges and lawyers in court. And these were then taken and studied, and statistics were made. And it turned out it was a good evaluation for these judges and lawyers. Because they were lay people who had knew nothing about the law, but had common sense to know how to be a professional in court and how to treat people.
Now, I noticed...
And the abuse and unfairness. Go ahead.
I noticed that the police officer was released on his own recognizance.
Oh, yeah, he didn't have to post bail.
Right.
You know, first of all, he had already probably run her record.
Right.
And knew that she was on probation.
Mm-hmm.
Smell the alcohol, and then believe her story. Why would I believe her story? And according to this article, it seems to intimate that she was outside the vehicle on the phone.
Right.
And what does she say? Hey, why are you treating me like this? I'm not being violent.
My car was stolen.
Why are you hitting me? I'm not fighting you. Why are you hitting me?
And then
she said, my car was stolen.
Right.
And I found it. It says, I was trying to crank the car when I found it. But then it intimates that she was outside the vehicle on her cell phone.
Right. The other thing I find interesting is her original conviction was for possession of a controlled substance without a prescription, which doesn't, that doesn't mean she was dealing with cocaine or crack or things like that either.
No, she had pills. What it is.
Which, here in Serbia, most of the time you don't get prescriptions. I mean, when I travel, I worry sometimes because I have the medications that are prescribed by my doctor here but because of the system here, I don't have a prescription with me. They don't even put them in prescription bottles. When you buy them, they just give you the bottle.
Yes, so I know.
So if I were to carry, you've been here, if I were to carry those in the U.S., I could be stopped and charged with a felony.
Yeah.
Even though they were, now I presume, I guess, take it to trial and get my doctor's testimony that I was, but this whole thing smells to me very badly.
Yeah. When I was in Macedonia working with Petro, I had to get, his father's a doctor, and I was kind of sick to my stomach or some problem, and he sent me some medicine. Well, I'm like, Petra, where's the prescription? Oh, we don't need that here. You can walk into a pharmacy and get whatever you want. There's no problems with people being addicted to medications in Macedonia and Eastern Europe that I know of.
Well, most of the world, I mean, you can get a lot more drugs over the counter in most of the world in which I've lived than you can in the United States.
Everything is regulated.
So,
as with all due respect, as well as it should, because doctors are getting these people addicted to these pills all the time, and these people don't realize it. When they look, all of a sudden, they can't live without them. Being young, middle-aged, and old, they get them addicted. And the first thing to do is prescribe 500 pills.
Juan, we've got only 60 seconds left. What I want to ask you. It's my observation from people I knew growing up that went on to become police officers that they could have just as easily become criminals. It seems to me that at least in the American police culture, there's an awful lot of macho, almost thuggery involved.
Yes. And you got to remember one other thing. They're a fraternity. They back up each other. They'll do everything. I mean, you're out there carrying a gun, saving lives. So you gotta rely on your backup, on your boys, so you stand up for them.
Okay, well that's all the time we've got today, Juan. Thank you very much. And as always, I remind you, you only have 3 choices: give in, fight back, or get out. This is David Fincher for Truth and Lies Radio.